Welcome back to Booster Therapy and another episode of Commanding Presence. Today, we're breaking down a pretty controversial commander, but a commander that's a ton of fun. That's right, we're going to break down Negan the Cold-Blooded. For 2 colorless, a red, a white, and a black, we have a 4/3. When Negan enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each secretly choose a creature that player controls. Then those choices are revealed, and that player sacrifices those creatures. More importantly, whenever an opponent sacrifices a creature, you create a treasure token. So the idea here is building up some sacrifice resiliency, making sure we lock our opponents out of creatures, and make a ton of treasure. That's the idea. On top of that mechanic being very fun, we actually played this last night with a few of our patrons, Hi There and Jay Wells. And it was a ton of fun for me to play that. So thank you guys for playing. Actually, last night we played a few matches with a bunch of our patrons. So it was a ton of fun. It's something that Pat and I want to continue doing. We had a blast. Hopefully all of our patrons that got to play had a blast, and those that were watching enjoyed it. We had, again, a bunch of fun. So to break down Negan, let's start off with the ramp. The first thing we have here is land tax. Land tax is just really powerful. We have a strong enough basic land base that this really gets that payoff. Soul Ring, because what would a deck be without a Soul Ring? Arcane Signet, because I could just say what I said again, but Arcane Signet and Soul Ring just hand in hand go into pretty much every deck. Thought Vessel, Talisman of Hierarchy, Felwar Stone, Talisman of Conviction, a lot of 2-mana ramp, Solemn Simulacrum. Again, this deck does sacrifice a lot of creatures, and this is one of those ones that just is a great creature to sacrifice. And Smothering Tide, because we're going to make a ton of treasures, and any way we can do that, we want to double down on. Making treasures is good. So first, we're going to talk about just those sacrifice mechanics, the different ways that we're making everyone sacrifice creatures, and hopefully getting a ton of triggers off of Negan. The first one is Zot's Will. Choose one. If you control a commander, we get to do both. Each opponent sacrifices a creature they control with the greatest power, and then we can exile graveyards and make a bunch of thralls if we need to in a pinch. Demon's Disciple. We're going to see a lot of this merciless executioner type mechanic. When a creature comes in, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Kaya's Guile. I love the utility. One, you get to pick 2 of these, which is great. But one of the mechanics on here is each opponent sacrifices a creature, which would trigger Negan, make us some treasures, but we can also make, spirits, we can gain 4 life, we can exile cards from graveyards, and we can entwine to do it all. Custody Lich, I love this one because it turns on Monarch and gives us another way to start drawing cards. But when we become the Monarch, everyone sacrifices a creature. Lucille, of course Negan needs his bat, so equipped creature gets +2/+0 and Menace. And when it attacks, that defending player has to sacrifice a creature, and we create a 2/2 zombie. Single Combat. Each player chooses a creature or planeswalker they control and then sacrifices the rest. So we often are choosing Negan here. Could care less what happens to the rest of our creatures. They can all die. We just want to make a bunch of treasures so we can do a ton of fun things. Plague Crafter. Sacrifice either a creature or planeswalker, and if they don't have that, we get the upside of making him discard a card. Grave Pact, we're going to have lots of our creatures dying, which makes our opponents sacrifice more creatures. Rankle to Prankle, Flying Haste, and we can choose to make everyone sack creatures. I also like this because we can get some card draw out of it too. Mogus, God of Slaughter. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, they're either going to take 2 damage or sacrifice a creature. Dictate of Erebos, just like Grave Pact, except a different mana cost, and it has flash. Witch of the Moors, Death Touch 4/4 at the beginning of your end step. If you gained life this turn, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and then you return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This card is disgustingly powerful in this deck. We obviously have a ton of the pingers in here. As people have creatures dying, we're going to drain people is the idea. Witch of the Moor combos with that so well. Liliana's Triumph, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and if you control a Liliana Planeswalker, each opponent also discards a card. I just like that it's a 2-mana instant, making all of our opponents sack a creature. Fleshbag Marauder, everyone sacks a creature. Michiko Kanda, Truth Seeker. So this one is whenever a sorcered opponent controls deals damage to you, that player sacrifices a permanent, which is great. So if they're not combat focused, but they're dealing damage some other way, like Hondens, like we saw in one of the matches last night, this would make you have to sacrifice permanents. Butcher of Malik here, it's just like Grave Pact, but on a stick. Eldest Reborn, I love the massive amount of utility here, making opponents sacrifice, making them discard, and then getting something back. Soul Shatter, making people take care of that biggest CMC creature or planeswalker. And the Granddaddy, the Cataclysmic Gearhulk, basically the balance on a stick. This thing is super powerful and actually really helped me pull off a victory last night by putting a ton of treasures on the board after someone built up a board state full of disgusting, relentless rats. Next, we're going to talk about a little bit of our resiliency in creatures. So we're going to have a lot of things that enter the battlefield and sacrifice, so we want to find ways to get them back to our hand. First one is Nightmare Shepherd. This doesn't get it back to our hand, but we can exile it and then do it again and make more treasures. Phyrexian Reclamation for 2 mana and 2 life. We can take anything in our graveyard and put it back in our hand. The Sun Titan, the ETB and attack trigger to get something 3 or less, which is a lot of what this deck is. There's a ton of low CMC, and getting those little creatures back is valuable. Luminous Broodmoth, it's kind of the same concept of Nightmare Shepherd, but we don't have the downside of having to exile the creature to do this. Egadine's Awakening, it takes up a land slot, which is great for us, and we can return a bunch of creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield. Athreos, God of Passage, I love one that it's a god, so it's indestructible and can just be powerful, but if people don't want creatures coming back to our hand, they're going to have to pay 3 life. Draina, the Last Blood Chief, I love this one. It also is politically charged. We can encourage our opponents to make the choices, which is just so on theme with Negan. You have to make the choice of how you are going to die. And Ravos Soul Tender, at the beginning of each upkeep, we actually get to return a creature from our graveyard to our hand. Other bonus there is it anthems all of our creatures, which is pretty sweet. Next, we're going to talk about just some of our utility creatures, things that play into our different mechanics here, whether it's sacrificing creatures or just big beefy creatures that do damage. The first one is Grave Titan. Grave Titan is one of my favorite cards for any deck that you're playing black in. It's just a devastating presence on the board. Opposition Agent, we can flash it in and control all of those tutor effects, search libraries, fetch lands, you name it. We take control of it and benefit. Clackbridge Troll, I like this one because it's a way that we're going to encourage our opponents to sacrifice creatures to not take damage from it, and that gets us treasures and also gets us card draw. Clackbridge Troll is a card that I think a lot of people sleep on. It's an 8/8 trample haste for 5. That's downside is a huge benefit. Sometimes you prefer it. Massacre Worm, it's kind of that board wipe, but more importantly, whenever a creature an opponent controls die, they lose 2 life. We have so much of that happening. This is just going to help whittle people down. Gadrick the Crown Scourge, at the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. So it's a 5/4 that often is going to get to attack because we'll have more than 4 artifacts with our treasure tokens. And again, we're looking to make a ton of treasures. That's the idea. Blood Artist, just a really good card for pinging people down as things die. Zulaport Cutthroat, same idea as Blood Artist, except with just our own creatures. Kalidas, Trader of Get, love this one. If a non-token creature an opponent controls die, we make a 2/2 zombie. Then we can sacrifice those zombies, put 2/1 counters, and beef it up. But really, this is just to give us that token generation as things die. The Mayhem Devil. We're sacrificing things, they're sacrificing things, everybody's sacrificing stuff. When you use a treasure, you have to sacrifice it. This just pings people down the whole long way. And then, of course, Revel in Riches. It's one of the ways we can even win. So it's another one where when a creature dies, we get a treasure token, which is great. So one of those death triggers. But at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 10 or more treasures, which happens a lot, we're going to win the game. Next, we're going to talk about some of our flicker effects with this one that just works well with Negan to double down on his triggers and also to protect some of our targets. Flicker effects are great for protecting any of our, Zulaport Cutthroat, Mayhem Devils, any of the things that we need to keep on board. Or if we need a double ETB trigger with Sun Titan or Grave Titan, it's just a lot of utility. First one is Flicker of Fate. Next one is the Eldrazi Displacer. The only downside here is we got to make sure we get one of our filter lands or one of the lands that taps 4 colorless, but we have enough of those in here that make that happen and make it easy to do. Ephemerate, we get to rebound this one and do it twice, and it's 1 mana instant that minimally protects Negan or any of our other creatures. Conjurer's Closet, this is every turn getting to do the Negan thing. And I'll say this, you guys, the secretly choosing piece is beyond fun for a mechanic. It's manipulative, it's very great, it works out in so many ways. You can have fun, you can be risky, and just enjoy how that works with Negan. Flicker Wisp, another way to just save a creature, return it, or just flicker it to get that extra benefit. Eerie Interlude, we can kind of, this I like, is almost like a protection against any of those evil things. I mean, it won't purely get away from everything, but when there's a board wipe, we can clean up all the creatures on our board with this one. They come back at the end steps, we avoid the board wipe, and we get to double down on all those ETB triggers. And then, of course, Long Road Home, exiling Negan comes back at the end step with a 1/1 counter, just another way to double down and getting that trigger again and also protecting our card. Next thing we're going to talk about quick is some of our other draw mechanics outside of what we've already talked about. The first one here is Scheming Symmetry. I love making friends. I also think it's very Negan themed. I think he would partner in this exact way to see what choices are made. Grim Haruspex, we're gonna have a ton of creatures dying, you guys. So whenever another non-token creature you control dies with any of our sack creatures, we're gonna draw a card. Mangara the Diplomat, so we're probably gonna get a lot of hate for so many reasons, and people are gonna attack us, and when they do, we get to draw a card that's real good. Harvester of Souls, whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card, so no downside of it having to be our creature. This is kind of that super draw. And then, of course, Liliana, Dreadhorde General. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. It has the sacrifice 2 creatures. It creates tokens. This is like the full package for utility with Negan. Next, we're going to talk about some of our removal outside of the insane amount that we've already discussed. First one here is Toxic Deluge for a big old board wipe. If we can't seem to get our own board state getting to go, we're going to use something like this to reset everyone else and buy us some time. Ruinous Ultimatum is disgusting too. This is so good. If you're playing Mardu, please play this card. Destroy all non-land permanents your opponents control for 7 mana is absurd, so make sure you play this one. Just very powerful. Hagra Mauling, again, another destroy creature spell that only takes up a land slot. It's just really effective with that. Generous Gift, destroy target permanent, so it's any permanent, and we give them a friendly little elf that hopefully, elephant, it's almost Christmas, you know. We give them a friendly elephant that hopefully they get to sacrifice later. Last thing we're going to talk about is the combos with this one. There's a few cards that we can combo off with. First one is Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Sanguine Bond, whenever you gain life, an opponent loses that much life. So same thing as Veto, but a little bit more expensive, but a little bit more resilient as an enchantment. And then, of course, any of those two, alongside of Exquisite Blood, makes for an infinite loop of lost life once somebody either gains or loses life in any one of these ways. So having these two out on the board and cracking in will win you the game. And if that doesn't work because people interrupt it, let's use all of the treasures we've made to exsanguinate and win. That is Negan the Cold-Blooded. Hopefully you all enjoyed that. Just a quick pass of the lands, all of the deck lists, and all of the information on how you can learn more about this deck or even purchase it is in the description of this video, so please make sure you check that out. And until next time, this is Booster Therapy. You have a wonderful rest of your day.